wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
The Meditations of
Hello,
Marcus
listeners.
Aurelius,
This is
Book
the Sunday
5,
Stoic Podcast, and
number
I'm
5.
Steve, coming to you from Conway, Arkansas. I just want you to know that you all are some of my favorite preferred indifferents. And I want to thank my patrons who have been supporting the show. Their contributions have meant a lot to me, both because it made the show possible and just their support and their interest in this philosophy. I have decided to turn off my Patreon account for now because my life is getting busier as my son is getting older, and I don't have the time to devote the time necessary to provide patrons with quality benefits. So I'm going to back off of that for now. If you wish to support the show, you can always send me enough money to buy a beer to PayPal, sundaystoic@gmail.com, but I'm not going to ask for patrons for a while. But thank you so much to all of you who have supported the show. On the same note, you may find that some of my shows may be shorter. I may miss a few weeks now and again as life gets busier, but I may also do a few more frequent, shorter episodes during the week. So things may mix around a bit as I adjust to an ever-changing life. This week we're going to hear from Marcus Aurelius from the Meditations. I'm actually going to read from a different translation than I read from last week. I will put a link in the show description. But we are going to hear Marcus kind of talking to himself about excuses and how he has to quit making excuses and start applying the talents that he has to living the good life. And I think we should consider doing the same.
Wit and smartness are not your talent. What then? There are a great many other good qualities in which you cannot pretend nature has failed you. Improve them as far as you can, and let us have that which is perfectly in your power. You may, if you please, behave yourself like a man of gravity and good faith, endure hardship and despise pleasure, want but a few things, and complain of nothing. You may be gentle and magnanimous, if you please, and have nothing of luxury or trifling in your disposition. Do not you see how much you may do if you have a mind to it, where the plea of incapacity is out of place? And yet you do not push forward as you should do. What then? Does any natural defect force you to grumble, to lay your faults upon your constitution, to be stingy or a flatterer, or to seek after popularity, boast and be disturbed in mind? Can you say you are so weakly made as to be driven by these practices? The immortal gods know the contrary. No, you might have stood clear of all this long since, and after all, if your parts were somewhat slow, and your understanding heavy, your way had been to have taken more pains with yourself, and not to have lain fallow and remained content with your own dullness.
Oh, you're not the smartest cookie in the jar. You're not very smart at all, actually. But you're pretty good at working hard. You're pretty good at getting along with few possessions. And you should just get to it. Come on, get it going. And even if being not too smart is a problem you've had a lot of time to work on improving your thinking, and you haven't improved your thinking. You've been lazy. This is kind of what Marcus is telling himself here. He says, so you're not the smartest guy in the room. What about it? You have lots of other qualities. If you look back to some of the early heads of the Stoa, there were some who weren't the brightest bulbs in the box, but they were known as hard workers. Cleanthes comes to mind. You don't you can get a lot done by putting in the sweat. You don't have to be a Chrysippus and a great writer and things. You can be a hard worker and get things done. So that's what he's kind of hinting at here. You just got to put in the work. We have to get to work. We have to have action. We have to put in the effort. We can't just think about it or complain about what we don't have. Take what you got and work with it. So the way I want to apply this in my life is, first of all, I want to make a list. What are the things that nature has given me that I can use, that are my skills, my gifts, as it were? He lists a few of his own. What do I have that I can put to good work? And then, what are some things that I wish I had? You might have to, if you're doing this along with me, you might have to categorize those. What are things you wish you had that you might as well just say, I'm never going to do that? Like, I'm never going to be a great singer or a lead guitarist of any fame. Right? These are not things that I have, talents that I have. But what are things that I can do a little bit that I could improve on? Because Marcus even says at the end of this, you might not be so smart, but you could have worked on it. You've had time to work on getting smarter, but you haven't. So stop wasting time. So I'm thinking about journaling this week. I want to give you some thoughts about journaling. And if you have any thoughts of your own that you want to share, email me and I'll put them on the air. SundayStoic@gmail.com. But my thoughts are... once again, I want to journal. I want to make a list. Things, talents of mine that are gifts of nature that I could use, not just in any old way, but to promote my growth as a budding prokopton, a philosopher, as it were, one who makes progress in philosophy. I also want to focus on something that... I've read in a number of places, but I've been reading the book Secular Buddhism. There's a podcast by the same title by Noah. I forget his last name right now. Rasheda, something like that. If I recall, I'll put a link in the show description to that podcast. But he talks about basically checking your impressions, your assumptions, as he calls them. What are you assuming each day? What stories are you applying to reality that are potentially untrue and making you unhappy and preventing you from making progress? Examples would be like someone cuts you off in traffic, which for whatever reason is always our example, right? When we talk about Stoicism, and in this case, a little bit of Buddhism. But someone cuts you off in traffic and you apply a story. That guy's a jerk. Of course, that guy could be driving his wife to the hospital. So maybe start thinking about your assumptions, your impressions. Catch yourself in the moment, and if you're not good at that, catch yourself at the end of the day. What are some assumptions I made today that probably weren't very helpful? I assumed that the guy who cut me off in traffic was doing it to me. I assumed that my car breaking down happened to me, like it was a affront to me by nature. My car was trying to make me mad almost. I assumed it was bad. I assumed that the politicians' decisions I saw on the news were insane or whatever. What are your assumptions that you're making that are raising your blood pressure, that are making you less and less, removing your equanimity, that sort of thing? Write those down. What are your assumptions? And those assumptions could go the other way. Let's just talk about like a neighbor. I've had a neighbor that annoys the hell out of me because of their stupid dogs and them yelling and stuff like that. So I assume my neighbors are idiots and jerks, and they don't appreciate what it means to be a neighbor. So then I'm mad. Even when I see them drive by, I'm like, right? Well, that's I'm putting a story on top of this. Maybe they are that way, but that doesn't mean that I have to think about it. I shouldn't let them live in my head. So I will attempt to suspend judgment, or I can practice cultivating the fact that remembering that they are fellow human beings on the same journey that I'm on, and cultivate that aspect, cultivate an opposite counterbalance to the story that I automatically tell myself, to make myself more accepting of the things that happen around me, accepting my fate, as it were. Anyway, so I'm going to work on journaling on those two things, listing my the skills that I have and those that maybe I should try to improve, and trying to reflect each day on some of the impressions I've had during the day that I shouldn't have assented to, and maybe even some impressions that were positive that maybe I still shouldn't have assented to, and see if that helps me to start catching impressions as I make them live, rather than at the end of the day. All right, so let me know if you have any practices like this that have been helpful to you, and shoot them to me, sundaystoic@gmail.com. But until then, I am going to get out of here and have myself an evening fishing with my son. So seize the day. Carpe diem.